the Indonesian president reiterated your country's commitment to achieving net zero carbon emissions before 2060. What kind of progress are you making to get to that goal?
Yeah, thank you, Anand. So basically, as the president explained, and maybe some of our colleagues in the Ministry of Environment has explained, in Indonesia, there's a few major sectors that we need to tackle in order to reach net zero. And the big ones will be the FOLU and also the energy sector. And of course, in the FOLU sector, we actually have done quite a lot to reduce the basically deforestation, because Indonesia is blessed with forest and we are doing more and more to protect the forest. On the energy sector, basically, the challenge is about decarbonizing our power grid. And we actually have just created a plan together with several countries, G7, Denmark, and Norway, to devise the long-term plan so that we can target to do 2050 net zero in the power sector. So this is a few things that we are working on in Indonesia.
And of course, Minister, the transition to green renewable energy comes with many challenges. In fact, recently, Indonesia and the Asian Development Bank announced an agreement to close a coal-powered plant as part of that effort to move to renewable energy. What can you tell us about the transition and the challenges that it poses for you?
Yeah, I think in Indonesia, like any other countries, it has its own initial conditions issues and of course the constraints. And for Indonesia today, we are a developing economy. Right now, the power consumption is still relatively low, about 1,200 kilowatt hours per capita. And as the economic growth, the power demand will actually also goes with it. And actually today, our power sector is still mostly powered by fossil, especially coal, and the coal fleet that we have is still relatively young. So this is the challenge, that you have all these young assets that is still economically productive, and you need to do something with it, right? So for us, what we believe to be the foundational move or no regret move is that we need to continue strengthen our transmission line, because there is this terms in the energy transition. They say no transition without transmission, and that is very, very critical, especially if you look at Indonesia. Given the geography, we have 17,500 islands, and all the major islands have to be run on their own separate grid. And the renewable potentials are quite plentiful, but it may not be in the demand center. So we need to make sure that we have like a strong system to be able to absorb all these renewables, because some of the renewables, the main renewable in Indonesia in terms of amount will be solar. And solar, of course, is variable. When the sun doesn't shine, you don't have electrons flows.
Right.
So that is one thing, building a lot of, we need to make sure we have a good grid. And then we can build more renewable to absorb it. And of course, there's this issue, what to do with the young coal fleet. And in order for us to reduce output from the young coal fleet, we do need concessional financing and grants, because there will be value destruction in that asset and those assets.
I want to get to financing in a moment, but what role is China playing right now in cooperation with your country in this battle against climate change? China recently financed the high-speed railway, the 142-kilometer railway that connects the capital, Jakarta, with Bandung, and that was done under China's Belt and Road Initiative. In what other areas is Indonesia and China working together to tackle and mitigate the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, so last time in the Belt and Road Forum, there's a few of the cooperation that's being announced and signed. But the major things is basically, I think China has been quite active in investing in Indonesia, and basically there's this maybe Chinese technologies and Chinese companies that have global leadership on certain areas. For example, we are trying to find ways to cooperate and in solar PV manufacturing, because I think Chinese companies have very strong positions in there. Electric vehicle is also another sector that we are working quite a lot with the Chinese companies, and of course with the government, and and of course battery technology. So on top of that, you mentioned about high-speed rail. In terms of infrastructure, the Chinese companies are also quite active. So basically, in what we do want is, I think China also have been quite successful in building significant capacity that is relevant for energy transition, in electrification of transport, in building a lot of renewables power plants and the supply chain, and we would like to be able to tap into the expertise.
You mentioned electric vehicles, and of course, there's a big focus on that around the world right now, the shift away from using fossil fuels. Indonesia is very rich in some key minerals like copper, nickel, cobalt, bauxite. These minerals are, of course, essential for the manufacture of electric vehicles, especially for batteries, as you pointed out a moment ago. I mean, what is your country's top priorities when it comes to the energy transmission from fossil driven vehicles to electric vehicles?
Yeah, so this is a big push for us in this moment, because we believe that now the technology is quite mature. We see the two-wheeler and four-wheelers has been proven to be reliable in many countries, including China. And China, I think today maybe about 1/3 of the new vehicles is already EV, right? Indonesia is not yet there, but we are starting. So this year we have introduced a government incentive program. Basically, it's about $450 of incentive if you want to buy motorbike, which is basically hopefully will bring that to parity with the combustion engine motorbike, and we give about tax cuts about 10% of the price for four-wheelers. So I think in the demand side, that is what we want to push. We want to basically give incentive to improve the demand. And on the other hand, we also are looking for manufacturers, and we want to invite more manufacturers of EV in Indonesia to be able to set up shop, because Indonesian auto market is also quite big. Yeah. We do have an automotive industry today in Indonesia, albeit it's still mostly dominated by fossil or combustion engine, if you will. In terms of batteries, yeah. Go ahead.
You say you're working with manufacturers right now. China, of course, has taken the lead in the manufacture of electric vehicles. It produces the highest number of electric vehicles right now. It's the world's biggest exporter of automobiles. What kind of technology transfers do you envisage from China in developing your own industry?
Yeah, so maybe a few things here. First of all, in Indonesia, we do have, we introduced that incentives. The one that we give to the customer is only eligible for the cars that is manufactured in the country with certain local content requirements. So we are inviting people to set up shop and bring the supply chain domestically. And of course, once they build the factories and they create the supply chain, you'll get the technology as well. We also work with a few companies, both from China as well as others, to develop the battery. As you mentioned initially, Indonesia have the raw materials, the critical minerals, if you will, that is needed. And of course, we probably have more than Indonesian domestic demand. So there is this global responsibility also to share for the global energy transition. But of course, we also want to make sure that these critical minerals is processed in Indonesia to create more multiplier effect, economic benefits, and also so that it manufactured for Indonesian use as well.
Right, you mentioned finance a moment ago, and one of the very early accomplishments of COP28 was the fact that the Loss and Damage Fund is now operational. That Loss and Damage Fund was adopted at COP27 in Egypt a year ago. It will help those countries trying to make the transition to climate change with current challenges, things like drought, water shortages, migration, things like that. What is your sense of the kind of finances that are needed, especially for developing countries like yours?
Yeah, so I think we are quite happy to see that this promise from last year become reality in terms of the fund. I think now, hopefully, that we can find good projects. People can find good projects. The fund can actually do real effective work to reduce the loss and damages. Hopefully, again, more and more funds is being put. What I would like to maybe share, maybe not exactly loss and damages per se, but in our experience discussing about energy transition with other developed nations, is that unfortunately today there is still some mismatch or gaps between the type of financing needed with the the kind of projects that is available. For example, if you want to build power plants, typically those power plants are economically viable, so any commercial type of financing will be okay. But the moment you talk about early decommissioning of coal-fired power plants that still have a lot of economic value, then you will need what I say positive NPV to offset the negative NPV created, which is basically deeply concessional and or grants. And of course, if you want to build more and more transmission, the type of transmission, the type of technology or the smart grid, you'll need more investment. And typically this type of infrastructure investment is relatively low yielding, and also you need concessional. Sometimes we kind of equate the number, like 1 billion is 1 billion, 10 billion is 10 billion. Typically I say it like, look, 1 million grant is actually probably better than 1 billion of market rate, because you have that NPV positive in there. But anyway, of course, because some of these countries may not be investment grade, so we probably need to provide different type of financing.